I want to say something real quick that all of Christianity needs to know and understand, and that they don't understand. I've never met a single Christian that understands this, even though it's an obvious or a blatant truth. A lot of people believe this idea that as long as you love your neighbor, you're keeping the law. That, just so long as you love your neighbor, you're keeping the law. But that is exactly and obviously false. It is blatantly false. And the reason that it's false is because you're putting the cart before the horse. Okay? The law teaches you to love God and love your neighbor. Okay? It's really as long as you're keeping the law, then you're loving your neighbor. But nobody teaches it that way. Nobody. Everybody teaches that as long as you come up with this arbitrary or ambiguous definition of what love is, and then you just do that, and you just act all uber hyper spiritual, and you just act according to your own belief on what love is, then you're keeping the law. And that's just not the case. That's why Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Because if you loved God, you would keep the law. And if you loved your neighbor, you would keep the law. The whole law hangs upon those two things, loving God and loving your neighbor. That's why God created the law, to teach you how to love God and love your neighbor. God created the law for men and not man for the law. That's what the Bible says. The Bible explicitly says that. The law was made to serve man. Man was not made to serve the law. So you say, oh, I love my neighbor. And then I ask you, are you living in fornication? Because if you are, then you're a liar. You don't love your neighbor, and you don't love God. If you're living in fornication, you can't claim you love God, and you can't claim you love your neighbor. It doesn't work that way. How it works is, if you love God, then you keep the commandments. And if you love your neighbor, then you keep the commandments. And if you're walking in the Spirit, and you're walking in the faith of Jesus Christ, then you will by nature keep the law, and you will by nature love God and love your neighbor. A lot of people believe that the law is punitive. They even have like an idea that the law is somehow unrighteous. But no, Jesus fulfilled the law because it is righteous. When Jesus fulfilled the law, he proved that the law is righteous. And I've never met not a single Christian that could explain this. Not one. Not one. There is no one else out there. No one. It doesn't exist. I've never met a single person that said, hey, keeping the law is loving your neighbor. Not loving your neighbor is keeping the law. It's if and that's the only way that you really have a standard of knowledge, because then the law is just arbitrary. Like, it's just every person just comes up with their own definition of love, and they just do that. And that's what you're seeing in the world. There is no set definition. Everybody just kind of does whatever they freaking want to. They just sit around and come up with their own definition of love. Hey, I'm a good person. Look at how I love people. And it's like, love. You're constantly committing fornication. You're a drunk. You're a drunkard. You're all this other stuff, and you're sitting there telling me that you love God and you love your neighbor. Well, the Bible says that there's all these laws. There's all these judgments that God put out there. And if you're not keeping those judgments, then you're just lying to yourself when you say, I love God and I love my neighbor. And I'm not saying all of us don't lie to ourselves. We all lie to ourselves on that. But you need to know which man you're walking in. Okay? Because if you're walking in fornication and you're walking in sin, then you're walking in the old man. And if you're walking in the old man, then there's no way that you're loving God and loving your neighbor. The only way you can complete those things is to walk in the new man, to walk in faith and thankfulness and love for Jesus Christ. And as Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Not for salvation. That loving God has nothing to do with your salvation. Salvation has to do with trusting what Christ did on the cross. Okay? Loving God has nothing to do with salvation. Loving God has to do with how willing you are to keep his judgments. If you love God, you'll keep his commandments. And if you love your neighbor, you'll keep his commandments. That's just the way it is. And nobody's looking at it right. Everybody's looking at it the exact opposite of right. Why do you think the church is in such a bad state? It's terrible, the state we're in. God bless.